So, have you ever really stopped to think about what happens when an entire philosophy of war, something people have believed in for centuries, is just proven wrong? I mean, completely and totally wrong in the blink of an eye. When this long held belief in skill, in precision, in the art of the duel is suddenly made obsolete by a machine that just throws the rulebook out the window? Well, that's the story we're getting into today. And this isn't just about a plane. It's about that specific moment when industrial might met martial artistry at 25,000 feet and changed warfare forever. Okay, let's really dive in, because this question right here, this is the whole story in a nutshell. You see, for the elite pilots of the German Luftwaffe, air combat was a noble duel. It was this deadly, beautiful dance of skill, timing, and pinpoint precision. Their fighters, like the legendary Bf-109, they were basically the rapiers of the sky. Then, in 1943, America arrives. And they didn't bring a rapier. They brought an industrial sledgehammer with wings. And it was about to shatter every single rule the duelists thought they knew. I want you to just try and imagine being Herman Keller on that day. You're one of the best pilots in the world and one of the best planes ever built. You spot this huge, unfamiliar American fighter, and you move in to engage. And in less time than it takes to say this sentence, your wingman's airplane just ceases to exist. It doesn't catch on fire, it doesn't trail smoke and spiral down to the earth. It just disintegrates, comes apart, aluminum confetti. That was the moment the Luftwaffe met the Republic P-47 Thunderbolt. And for them, in that instant, everything changed. That shock, it wasn't just about a new gun. It was their first terrifying glimpse of an entirely new kind of war. To really get the impact of the P-47, you have to understand that what was clashing up there in the sky wasn't just metal against metal. No, it was a head-on collision between two totally opposite ways of looking at the world. On one side, you had this German belief in the supremacy of the skilled individual warrior. And on the other, you had the American belief in the unstoppable, overwhelming power of the assembly line. Yeah, this lays it out perfectly. The German philosophy, the art of combat, it was like fencing. Their pilots were virtuosos, they were artists. They were trained to get a kill with one or two perfectly placed, explosive cannon shells. It's elegant, it's efficient, and it all comes down to the skill of the man in the cockpit. The American philosophy, though, the industry of war, it's not elegant at all. It's brutally pragmatic. It basically said, look, why rely on one perfect shot from a genius pilot when we can just fill a huge box of sky with so much lead that the target cannot possibly survive, no matter how good the guy flying it is? It's not about artistry. It's about guaranteeing a result with brute force. And listen to this. This comes from Gunther Rahl, the third highest scoring fighter ace in all of history. For him, machine guns were a step backwards. They were a crude, clumsy weapon for a job that demanded a scalpel. He and his comrades had this absolute faith that their skill, combined with their advanced cannon, was the peak evolution of air combat. They saw themselves as master swordsmen, and they simply couldn't imagine a future where the sword was about to become obsolete. And here is the total opposite perspective from P-47 ace Robert Johnson. The contrast is just stark. There's no romance in his words, no talk of art or dueling. Johnson is basically laying out a business plan for destruction. The goal is to destroy the target, and the most efficient way to guarantee that outcome is volume, pumping out so much firepower that the enemy pilot's skill becomes almost irrelevant. It's a chilling but incredibly effective vision of modern war. So, how does a philosophy like that translate into actual hardware? Well, this is where we get into the cold, hard math. Because the American industry of war wasn't just some abstract concept, it was a set of brutal, undeniable numbers. And these are the numbers that explain the shock and awe those German pilots felt. Just take a second and let that number sink in. 6,400 rounds per minute. Let's break that down. That's over 100 heavy caliber bullets leaving the barrels every single second. This wasn't just shooting at something, this was creating a cone of pure destruction. A German pilot flying into that wasn't trying to dodge a few bullets, they were trying to fly through a solid, moving wall of metal. It was a density of fire that had never, ever been engineered into a fighter plane before. But you know what? It's not just about how fast you can shoot. It's about how long you can keep shooting. And this right here reveals a massive, critical advantage. A German pilot in his Bf-109 had about 7 seconds worth of cannon fire. That's it. Every shot had to be perfect. But a P-47 pilot? He could hold down the trigger for 33 seconds. In a dogfight where decisions are made in a fraction of a second, 33 seconds is an absolute eternity. They could miss, adjust their aim, fire again, switch targets, all while the German pilot is sweating over his rapidly disappearing ammo count. And this is where all those numbers start to create a profound psychological gap. Just look at the ammo load difference. It's staggering. But the really insane number is the burst weight. In a single 1.5-second burst, just a quick squeeze of the trigger, a P-47 could throw 171 pounds of metal at you. That's like a whole person made of lead hitting your aircraft. This created what historians call ammunition anxiety. The German pilots were constantly worried, constantly conserving. The American pilots? They fought with the incredible confidence that comes from sheer, overwhelming abundance. And that's where this story turns. Because this overwhelming mass, it didn't just break airplanes, it broke minds. The P-47 waged a campaign of psychological terror that was every bit as effective as its physical destruction. It fundamentally changed the men who had to fly against it. You see, the P-47 was a huge, heavy aircraft. At first, everyone thought this was a major weakness. But American pilots figured out how to turn its greatest flaw into its deadliest weapon. They would hang out way up high where German engines struggled and just wait. Then they would dive. The Thunderbolt's sheer mass meant it picked up speed in a dive faster than anything the Germans had. They'd come screaming down, unleash that impossible storm of bullets, and then use all that momentum, all that kinetic energy, to rocket straight back up to a safe altitude where no one could follow. For a German pilot below, it was an absolute nightmare. There was no defense, no escape. It was just death from above. The psychological effect was so profound that Luftwaffe medical officers actually documented a condition they named Thunderbolt neurosis. This was not just regular battle fatigue. This was a specific clinical trauma linked to this one aircraft. Can you imagine that? Hardened veteran pilots, men with hundreds of combat hours, physically flinching at the sound of a distant engine, their bodies having an involuntary stress response to any noise that even vaguely resembled the horrifying buzzsaw of those 8 guns. They stopped fighting to win. They started fighting just to survive, creating complicated tactics designed for one thing and one thing only: avoiding the P-47. The plane wasn't just winning battles, it was systematically destroying the enemy's will to even fight. And this quote from the legendary German general Adolf Galland, it just gets to the absolute heart of the matter. He understood, he knew the P-47's real weapon wasn't the bullets. It was the message behind the bullets. Every single overwhelming, wasteful burst of fire was a communication. It said, we can build more planes than you can shoot down. We can make more bullets than you can count. Your skill is irrelevant because we will simply bury you under the sheer weight of our production. And that message, that crushing sense of inevitable defeat, that was more damaging to morale than any single plane shot down. And Galland was 100% right, because the P-47 wasn't some fluke. It was the lethal messenger for America's real ultimate weapon, an industrial capacity so vast it was like a force of nature. It would drown its enemies not in blood, but in steel. The most important battles weren't just being fought in the skies over Europe, they were being won on the factory floors of the American Midwest. Okay, I need you to just pause and look at this number. 840. That's not the total for a year. That is how many P-47s a single company, Republic Aviation, was rolling off its assembly lines every single month. That breaks down to 28 brand new 8-gun fighters rolling out the doors every single day. When German intelligence first got these reports, they dismissed them. They said it was impossible propaganda because they simply could not comprehend industrial production on that scale. And now, look at this comparison. This is where the true scale of the problem becomes just apocalyptic for Germany. That second bar, that's the entire German Reich. All of its factories, all of its different types of fighter planes, everything combined. A little over 2,000 planes a month. Pretty impressive. But then you look at that first bar. That's just Republic Aviation, making just P-47s. One American company was producing nearly half as many fighters as an entire nation. It's an unwinnable war of attrition. The math simply doesn't work. The war was already lost, right there on the assembly line. And of course, it wasn't just the planes. You have to feed the beast. And this number is just, it's hard to even wrap your head around it. 6.5 billion, with a B, rounds of ammunition from one factory in Missouri. This is the logistical ocean behind the philosophy of overwhelming firepower. It's one thing to design a plane with 8 guns. It is a completely different thing to have an industrial base that can feed those guns almost infinitely. This is what General Galland meant by excess. America could afford to be wasteful because for them, the supply was basically limitless. So, okay, the P-47 helped win the war, but its story doesn't end in 1945. Not even close. Its true legacy, the ghost of the Thunderbolt, is how it fundamentally altered the DNA of military thinking. It created a paradigm shift that we are still seeing the effects of all around us today. This is the key idea right here. Military historians call it the democratization of air combat. Think about it like this. A German ace with 200 victories. He's like a martial aristocrat, a knight. His skill is legendary. But his refined skill means a whole lot less when a 21-year-old farm kid from Iowa with a fraction of the experience can just point his plane in the general direction and fill the sky with an unavoidable storm of lead. The overwhelming technology acts as a great equalizer. It makes that individual aristocratic skill less of a deciding factor. And this is the long-term impact. This is the lesson that got burned into the American military psyche, and it's a simple and brutal one. Fair fights are for suckers. Victory in modern war comes from leveraging your industrial and technological superiority to create a contest that is so ridiculously unequal that the outcome is decided before the first shot is even fired. This principle, overwhelming force, became the absolute bedrock of American military doctrine for the rest of the 20th century and well into the 21st. And what's wild is just how fast this all happened. Look at this timeline. In 1942, the German model of the elite aerial duelist is king of the sky. Just 1 year later, 1943, the P-47 shows up and introduces this completely new idea. By 1944, it's not even a debate anymore. Industrial might is just steamrolling the old way of thinking. And after the war, it becomes official doctrine. The entire philosophy of air combat was completely rewritten in just a few short years. And that's really the ultimate lesson here. The P-47 didn't win because it was a better dogfighter in the traditional sense. It wasn't more nimble than a Bf-109. It won by making traditional dogfighting irrelevant. It was a true disruptive innovation. It showed up and proved that you don't have to outduel your opponent if you can simply and utterly overwhelm them. It changed the game by changing the rules. And this brings us right back to today, because the story of the P-47 isn't just history, it's a pattern of industry versus artistry, of overwhelming volume versus individual precision. So I'll leave you with this question. In our modern world of AI, of big data, of mass production, where else do you see this Thunderbolt mentality at work? Where else is overwhelming volume being used to make individual human skill irrelevant? Because the lesson of those 8 guns, a lesson that's still ringing out across the decades, is that the next great disruption probably won't come from someone who plays the current game better than anyone else. It'll come from someone who arrives with a completely new game, backed by a force of production that makes the old rules and the old masters simply irrelevant.